Between 1960 and 1964, Freedomland USA in the Bronx was the place to go for families on the East Coast who were looking for a little entertainment mixed in with a little history, too. And for young people who just wanted to have some fun and see a great concert. Well, our guest this week wrote the definitive history of Freedomland USA, Michael R. Virgintino. He's back with a book called Freedomland USA, More Definitive History. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ghosty. It's a pleasure to be back and talk about one of my favorite subjects.
Well, it's one of my favorite topics, too, and everybody's going to ask you this, so I might as well do it, too. How can something be more definitive? So what gave you the idea for this sequel to the first book?
Well, first of all, I never thought there would be a sequel because everything I thought I could find about the park had been found and appeared pretty much in that first volume, because all of the management people from the time have left us long ago. The records had been destroyed. But after the first book did come out, a number of employees and the children of employees contacted me to share their memories and what were previously unknown stories. They were thrilled to see the book, and they told me they had stories to convey. And I did interviews with about 100 employees or their children for this second volume. And the stories involve employees everywhere from the management office to those who operated attractions to those who worked at the Moon Bowl with all the celebrity entertainers, even the food service people. And in addition, I was able to talk with people who were either descendants of or knew various entertainers, and may not be celebrity entertainers, but they were the cowboys or cows or rodeo riders or circus performers who appeared at the park. So that led me into many new directions, and during this process, I found 5 archives scattered across the country that had files on Freedomland. And you would say, well, how would these archives obtain that information if what I thought all files, management files, were gone or purposely or accidentally destroyed? These were from the vendors, the landscapers, the boat builders who were contracted by the park, and their files ended up in archives from Mystic, Connecticut to Santa Barbara, California. So this opened up a treasure trove of new information. And in addition, I obtained several photo collections, about 3,000 photos from a gentleman by the name of Frank Adamo, who we lost several years ago, but he was a director of maintenance and operations. He saved 3,000 photos, prints, that were taken by the Freedomland photographers when the park was closed, and he turned those files over to me. And then I found several other prominent files within the last few years. And if you look at photos closely, you blow them up, or you look through a magnifying glass, you can see things in there that you did not know from any other source. So it's just connecting all the dots. And this new book happens to be even longer than the first book because of all that new information.
Well, obviously, on this program, we always like to talk about the various music acts that performed at Freedomland USA. You certainly covered a lot in the first book, but did you obtain new information about some of these acts from those archives you mentioned?
Yes, I have. Not necessarily from those specific archives, but through interviews and through my research of online publications with so many newspapers and magazines from back then and earlier now digitized. It now opens up a wealth of information. So I'll share a few with you.
Sure.
In the first book, I mentioned about Johnny Horton, the ballad singer, who sang the popular theme song for Freedomland, Johnny Freedom. And I thought he had not appeared at the park because Freedomland opened in June 1960, and Johnny Horton passed away, I think it was either October or November of that same year in a car accident. So I thought he never saw the park. Well, I found out he did arrive in the park early in the season of 1960. There was a contest of why I'm a patriotic American, and Johnny Horton came to issue the prizes to all the teenage winners. So he was at the park, and I have some information of what he did with all the winners as they parked together. Also found out a group from the Bronx known as the Dimensions. They were popular with the song Over the Rainbow that they performed at the park, and I only found this out by looking at some of the photographs, because I have photographs now from the Freedomland photographers showing different groups, and one by one I go through them trying to identify who was in these pictures. Most of those pictures did not have any source material written on the back or in the files. So I'm putting it together as I look through each individual photograph. So we know the Dimensions did appear there, at least on one occasion.
We're talking with author Michael R. Virgintino about his book, Freedomland U.S.A, More Definitive History. Any more acts that you discovered played at the park that we didn't cover in the first volume?
There was a group from New Jersey known as the Four Top Hatters, and they go back, I think, to the late 40s. But one of their popular songs was 45 Men in a Telephone Booth. And that sparked the phone booth stuffing craze among college students in the 50s and early 60s. And now, they performed for many years in local clubs in New Jersey through, I think, the early to mid-1970s. So they also performed at Freedomland. And then a couple of big names were Marvin Gaye. He was on the same stage with the Spinners. And then I found out that Nancy Sinatra was there. She wasn't billed to perform at Freedomland, but at the time she was married to Tommy Sands. And he sang with one of the Dorsey brothers, and they appeared at Freedomland. And according to a husband and wife team who were at the park to see Tommy Sands, Nancy was in the audience, and she was coaxed up onto the stage to sing a few songs with her husband. And the big surprise was the Supremes.
Wow.
I had been told by several people, and it's like 3 or 4 people, as teenagers, they saw the Supremes at Freedomland. But I could never document it. I could never find them in any newspaper articles. Of course, there were no longer any park records available to show that they appeared there. And what Freedomland often did was they would run newspaper ads in the Daily News or the New York Journal American to say, coming this weekend, come see Chubby Checker or come see Paul Anka. And I have plenty of copies of those ads. Nothing mentions the Supremes. So I end up speaking with a woman who is the daughter of the president of Freedomland. He was president for the last years. His name was Hyman Green. And I mentioned the Supremes to her, and she says, oh, definitely they were there. She said, I went backstage thanks to my father, and I met Diana Ross and the Supremes. And we were trying to figure out why there was no record of them there, because one of the members of the Supremes has written a book, and she even, in the back of the book, compiles everything the Supremes ever did. Every recording session, personal appearance, but she never listed Freedomland. And we kind of came to the conclusion that they left in a huff. They may have only performed there for a day and a half, because she said they left without any notice, and it put my father in a bad situation where he had to find another singing group to fill the void. for the performances because the shows were going on for like 5 or 6 days. And we couldn't figure out why it was, other than maybe they felt they weren't given the right publicity. They didn't have the newspaper ads, or there wasn't the press release about them. Maybe they weren't happy with what they were getting paid. But she proved to me with her documentation that the Supremes were at the park. So it's interesting how I obtain this information from various resources. Someone tells me something, and it leads me into a journey on another path to see if I can corroborate the information, either with an interview or with documentation. And luckily for the Supremes, I still don't have paper documentation,
right,
but I have several people, including this woman who met them there, that Diana Ross and the Supremes actually appeared at the park.
I wanted to mention, as we start to wrap up, actually, the connections with, I think it was Mad Magazine with Freedomland?
Yes. Well, it's a connection with Mad Magazine and also the Match Game television show. There is a fellow who was a contributor to Mad Magazine by the name of Dick DiBartolo.
Sure,
he was also on the production staff of Match Game. And he ventured in to the creative mode of making 8mm movies in the early 1960s using the production staff from Match Game. So they came to the park one day before the park opened, about 6, 7 in the morning, and they created this film. I think it was a 45-minute film called How the West Was Won, Barely. And it was a spoof on the movie How the West Was Won. Right. And they filmed it in the Wild West sections of Freedomland. Gene Rabin narrated it. And the production staff performed in it. It met great reviews when it was shown in Manhattan, but we can't see it now because he says now it has copyright issues on the music that was used, so he can't post it anywhere. I have seen it. He can show it privately, but the public cannot see it at this time. But also, Mad Magazine had several of its panels during the 5 years of Freedomland, had several panels that referenced Freedomland in the publication.
Wow. So I have a question. I didn't ask this question last time we spoke, but I know that, it's a different era. But do you think something like this, some kind of a theme park like this, could ever happen again in this area?
I don't think in the New York area cannot. We just don't have the land available. Our biggest land available, really, even with the suburbs of New York City, is really Central Park and Flushing Meadow, and those are not going to be developed into parks.
Right.
I think the cost also would be too expensive. There is a park being created in Oklahoma, Heartland America, it's going to be called, and it's going to have a lot of the same themes, history themes that Freedomland had, but I'm sure they're going to be created in a much more sophisticated, technology-driven way, where what we had at Freedomland, though it was on the cutting edge at the time, is passé, not just today, but probably was passé 25 years ago. So I'm looking forward to see what Heartland America does. The scheduled opening for that is fall of 2026. So we'll see if they can develop that. A lot of Disney folks, or former Disney folks, are involved in that, as were former Disney folks involved with Freedomland. So we'll see what occurs from that. I do have one interesting story to share with you before we go.
Sure.
That you will enjoy and your listeners will enjoy, and it involves WFDU's own Floyd Vivino, Uncle Floyd.
Right.
He shared a memory with me for Freedomland. He said his father brought him to the park when he was about 11 years old, and he wanted to go meet one of the Indian chiefs. Now, at Freedomland, the park hired a lot of Native Americans to portray surprisingly, Native Americans. But it might have been the Indian chief's one day off, or maybe he was on a break. So the Indian chief who was there to pose for photographs with the park guests, Floyd's father tells him to go on up and take a picture. And the Indian chief recognizes Floyd's father and starts talking to him in Italian, which kind of stunned Floyd. And it ended up that this was a stand-in for the actual Native American Indian chief, and he was a Sicilian, I believe, and he recognized Floyd's father, and because he had, as many Italians do, have the same facial features of Native Americans, and you put a headdress on him, he could pass for an American Indian. So Floyd relayed that story, and it was so interesting and so funny about with the Italian language, and then we put in the translation that I had to place that in the books. Floyd's such a great guy. That story had to be told.
Fantastic. So where can people go to actually get this second book on the Freedomland series, we'll call it?
Well, at my end of the series, I don't think I have another one in me. The book is only available online. Mostly you can find it on Amazon. Both books are still available on Amazon. But if you choose other outlets, you can go to Goodreads, you can go to Barnes & Noble online, and other online book readers will have it. You just have to search the title, and it'll pop up.
Fantastic. Well, Michael, I want to thank you again for coming on the show for this round 2, and you have a great rest of your day.
And thank you very much, Ghosty. Much appreciated.